Terrific. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to our first inter-university shared panel between our three institutions. My name is Pamela Xaverius, and I'm with Parkinson School of Health Sciences and Public Health, and I welcome you all to our virtual panel that features 4 successful grant writers from 4 different institutions. Loyola, DePaul, University of Illinois in Chicago, and the University of Health Sciences and Pharmacy. Our panelists are going to share a brief history of their grant writing experiences. Before I turn the introductions over to Dr. McMahon, I want to go over just a couple of housekeeping items. First, I would like to let you know that each speaker will have about 12 minutes to speak. A timer icon will appear at the 2-minute and 1-minute marks to alert the speaker to the end of their time. So if you see that pop up, I want you to understand what that is. Please reserve your questions for after the 4 panelists have an opportunity to share their thoughts. We will be monitoring the chat for all panelists, so we'll keep an eye on that. I'd like to ask that all attendees keep their microphones mute and their pictures off while the panelists are giving their discussions and their thoughts and insights. We will be recording this event and sharing the link with our contacts at each institution. And finally, a short survey is going to pop up after the presentations, but during the Q&A section to ask you a few questions about the panel and potential follow-up opportunities. With that, Dr. McMahon.
Thank you. I'm Susan McMahon. I am a professor of psychology and associate dean for research and graduate programs at DePaul University. And again, welcome. I'm just going to say a couple words about each of our speakers. We have Dr. Giovanni Pauletti is the Dean of Graduate Studies at University of Health Sciences and Pharmacy in St. Louis. As graduate and postdoctoral programs and performs clinical research about drug delivery technologies that benefit women's health and cancer therapy patients. Next, we have Dr. Lara Dugas, who's a professor of public health sciences at Loyola University, and her research specializes in non-communicable disease epidemiology. Her work has included the study of science of sleep metabolism and circadian rhythm in participants living in South Africa, Jamaica, Ghana, and the United States. Next, we will have Dr. Yolanda Suarez-Balcazar, serving as a professor of occupational therapy at University of Illinois, Chicago. Her interdisciplinary research examines the intersection of health, culture, and disability in investigating healthcare disparities of underrepresented youth with disabilities. And finally, we have Dr. Leonard Jason, who's the director of DePaul Center for Community Research and a professor of psychology, clinical and community psychology. Dr. Jason's research has spanned diverse topics of chronic fatigue syndrome, creative approaches such as Oxford House to drug addictions, and violence prevention interventions. So I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Dr. Pauletti.
Thanks so much, and hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, and I want to thank the organizer for inviting me to this very interesting approach to disseminate our challenging approach to grant writing. As you heard, my name is Giovanni Pauletti. I'm professor of biopharmaceutics and pharmacokinetics, which is a subspecialty within the broad field of pharmaceutical sciences. As a trained pharmacist, I draw all my research components from a basic science perspective, but over the years have certainly grown into different areas. So I thought maybe it might be interesting to the audience here to get a little bit stats. And so I have been in academia for 27 years in the US. I'm originally from Europe and moved over here to the US for postdoctoral research. And I've worked at large public institutions such as Texas Tech and the University of Cincinnati, as well as at smaller institutions such as my current institution here at UHSP in St. Louis. Overall, I did the accounting. I submitted over my career 103 grant applications. And when you do the math over 27 years, that's about 3.8 applications per year. And I also can share that the amount of application or the dollar amount per application varied from $2,000 to $5 million. And they ranged from 3-month time to 5 years time. And in addition, I applied to agency from the public sector. So these are the standard application agencies such as the National Institute of Health, Department of Defense, smaller foundation, private corporation, national, international. I'm funded by the WHO right now on some of my research. And the reason why I'm sharing that with you is you have to go all over the place in order to find resources that can support your research program. And the other part I think is important to share is that most of those activities shift over time. If you're at your early stage of your career, you're obviously trying to solidify your expertise in an area that is relevant to the community of our world. And so you become an expert and you're trying to finance your research operation through grant applications. And there are several different options that you can do. I hope that at each of your institutions, you have access to intramural funding opportunities, such as in grants that are provided by the Office of Research or the VP of Research. And make sure you utilize those grants as a basically jumping board for the next grant. So it's not to fulfill one requirement that you have set for yourself, but there needs to be a strategy behind it. Yeah, how are you going to use those data that you generate with intramural funds for extramural funds later on? And don't be shy to apply to small programs as well. Even though you can't maintain a continuous research program for 5 months, but if you get it for 2 months, it's still better than 0 months. So you have the resources that allow you to go step by step to the next level and build your portfolio that becomes then after a certain while, your ability to compete at the highest level, which I think is certainly the national and the international level. Don't feel shy to start out as a co-investigator. Find people who work on similar project or complementary project and get involved in those projects, because you learn a lot about team science, which at least in my field is pretty much the holy grail for resources at the grant competition. You can't do it all by yourself. You need a team of people. Now you have your own expertise, but by working with other people from different areas together, you learn what those areas are. And in my case, it starts out in molecular biology and goes down to engineering. And over the years, I learned so much from each of those fields that I was able to become principal investigator on grants that engaged people from all these areas. And most recently, I'm working on NIH-funded research that focuses on contraception, which involves engineering, pharmaceutical sciences, as well as behavioral sciences. So we use the feedback loop from end user, in this case, women, to actually optimize our product and progress on our research. So with that, I think I want to give you the last piece of advice is find a good mentor. The mentorship is so important, not only to develop a strategy, so you have somebody to bounce back ideas and can help you to navigate the difficulties of what granting agency would be appropriate for that, but also then helping you with the writing of those grants to make sure that reviewers will receive those in a favorable fashion. So I know my time is not up, but I'm pretty sure other people will use a couple minutes extra. And since I have to teach, I'll be only available for a short time period here, but certainly my email will be shared and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pauletti. That was really helpful. I'm going to ask folks to hold their questions to the side, and then we will ask Dr. Dugas if you don't mind sharing some of your tips. Before I turn it over to you, Dr. Pauletti, if we get any questions specific to you, I'll be sure to send those your way. Thank you so much. Dr. Dugas?
Thank you so much, Pam. It's a real pleasure to be here with this amazing audience. I was worried for a second that Dr. Pauletti was going to steal my thunder with his last point, and it was actually my first point. But I have a variation on that theme. But before I get there, so I'm Lara Dugas, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Public Health Sciences at Loyola University. And the reason that I am at Loyola University is the most important point, and it is to hitch your wagon to a star. And I hitched my wagon to Professor Amy Luke. And by hitching your wagon to a star, you will go places and you will get the experience and you will have the mentorship that you need to be able to be successful in grants. So I followed my passion, and Amy was a leader at the time and still is in the field that we both work in, and we do international research in African origin populations, and our work is based in US in the western suburbs of Chicago. In Ghana, we're located at the University of Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi. We have a research site at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, as well as a research site in the Seychelles and in Jamaica at the University of West Indies. And so I hitched my wagon to Amy very quickly, and pretty soon was on a path that brought me to where I am in terms of my grant work. It was really starting off as a passion and then followed through to the grants. But I will tell you that what I didn't know when I started out was that, and Dr. Pauletti again alluded to this, with the incredible amount of grants that he has submitted, that very few of your grants, particularly at the NIH level, will actually be funded. And, you know, the trick is not to be disheartened, but to really embrace what the reviewers write in your comments. And if possible, if you can reach out to the program officers to discuss your grant review and understand what it is that that program officer is looking for. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit more about the NIH grants submission. And it's almost disappointing to learn that it's very formulaic, and that when you submit an NIH grant, you really are following a very structured format. Obviously, your research is unique, but for the actual grant writing, there are certain pieces that you have to provide. And so when I think about an NIH grant versus a foundation grant, for example, I feel personally that the foundation grants may give you a bit more leeway to be more exciting in the actual application. And the foundation grants, I find you can really elevate. I have a foundation grant right now from the Wellcome Trust organization that has allowed me to be a hosted research chair in another department, actually in another country. And so you're able to really craft things much easier, I feel, with the foundation grants versus the NIH grants. Some of the barriers that I'm experiencing right now with my grant submission, I'm sure all of you know that the NIH cap has remained at $500,000 a year, and our grants or our science is really expensive, and it hasn't increased in over 10 years, 20 years. And so we're trying to do more with less. And so I'm really personally finding in my own research that I'm actually tapping it back a little bit and not trying to promise the world and then deliver a small part of that. I think the NIH is aware that research cap has remained at $500,000 a year, and it is very difficult to do everything with that amount. When you request from your program officers to go over that $500,000 research cap, when you are scored with on the percentile level, you will actually be placed in a different category. And so it makes it harder. And so I encourage people to stay within that cap. When I think about, crafting my proposals for NIH versus a foundation grant, I definitely bring it right in from the beginning. And I see Molly McAdam here from Loyola University. She's one of our grants administrators. Bring it in right from the start. Bring in the team that is there to support you, and they can really help you put together all those pieces. Each grant mechanism has different pieces, and so the guidelines are often changing. There are new forms available to make sure that you're being most efficient. I would highly recommend that people work very closely with their grant support team. Once the grant is being submitted, you know, I'm sure everyone agrees with me that it is very hard not to feel very passionate about your grant that you've submitted. You think it's brilliant, and you can't understand why they won't fund it, or you get a very poor score. So lately I have taken on letting it just go and moving on to the next grant, starting to write the next application. If you're on the NIH cycles, you know that you're submitting 3 times a year. Foundation grants are obviously in between that. And so, you know, having a good idea, hitching your wagon to a star, and then just keep moving forward. But reflecting on your scores is very important, but not taking it personally when you get that rejection. So that's really important, I feel. You know, the submitting to the NIH is very difficult. Your grant can get derailed in the discussion. So even though you have great scores, you can very quickly pick up if something happened in the group setting of the study review panel. And so just rather take all of those critiques to heart and incorporate them in your next round. So things that I've learned in the process is start early, reach out to the team, try and keep that cap under the 500,000 for R01s. Definitely don't take rejection personally, and just keep going. And most important, hit your wagon to a star. That was actually how I got my first NIH grant. It was hitching my wagon to Amy's team, as well as my collaborators at the University of Illinois, who had already made some incredible discoveries. And we were a transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary team working with basic science, mouse models, then to our larger studies in African origin populations. And so really be creative, find that hook that is going to make the reviewers excited about your application. A couple of last things, having sat in study section continuously since 2017, I think I always thought about it differently, but the reviewer who is bringing up and discussing your application, if they get an opportunity to discuss your application, they want to defend it because they have done the critique and it's been good enough to be in that top 50%. So you really want to give that reviewer some really beautiful nuggets so that they can present it to the room and make sure that they are excited about it and that the rest of the room gets excited about it so that you can get a great score at the end of the day. And I'm going to stop there, I think, and hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dugas. Really appreciate that. And we'll just move on to our next panelist here. And Dr. Suarez-Balcazar, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yolanda Suarez-Balcazar. I was trained as a community psychologist. And when I look back at my experience graduating grants, I don't remember how many I have submitted because some have been rejected and not funded, but I have worked on over 25 granted grants. Some are smaller grants, foundation grants, intramural university grants, and then I've also been part of larger grants, center grants, and DRIPs, which are disability rehabilitation and research grants, and all kinds of different grants focus on the intersection of race, health, and disability, and more so identifying the social determinants of health that impact Latinx families or children with disabilities and adults with disabilities from diverse backgrounds, and designing culturally tailored interventions. So here I put together a list of what are some of my tips or advice when it comes to grant writing. One of the first things that I was supposed to, as a graduate student at the University of Kansas, was part of a research and training center grant on independent living. And we actually were able as graduate students to see what a grant looked like. And I think it's really important when you start as a graduate student and your junior faculty career, as your department had 4 copies of funded grants. So when I started at Loyola, my former department had a whole shelf with all the funded grants in the department, and everyone could ask, can I see a funded grant? I think it was incredibly helpful because it's a lot of work, but you really want to be able to see one. And you should be able to ask your department head, mentors, can I see a funded grant? The components, how do you put together the different elements? The other great advice that I was provided with is join the agency announcements. So if you actually go to grants.gov, you can actually choose what type of grants do you want to be able to join, and they will send you announcements. That's incredibly helpful because then but also go to grants.gov and then get familiar with the different types of grants, like early career awards. What types are there? There are quite a bit of different types, and different agencies have different awards. Announcements about grants typically come out only 2 weeks before the due date. And it's not like we can drop everything and start dedicating time just to grant writing. So you need to be very strategic. Strategic about how do I get a grant that with appendix and everything might be over 100 pages together. At UIC, we have the Office of Research, and they're incredibly helpful, helping faculty navigate all this granting system with a few things. First, they send announcements, and there might be announcements that I don't know about, right? Because I register for federal announcements and the NICLR. And NICLR is National Institute of Independent Living and Rehabilitation Research, because they focus mostly on disability research, which is my area. Although I have received grants from different agencies and different foundations as well, I only register under NICLR. So I get their announcements. But it was really helpful for me to have a good relationship with the Office of Research in my college, because when there are announcements that relate to faculty focus area of research, they let us know. So about 10 years ago, the college sent a note. This Chicago Community Trust have this grant announcement about health disparities, health equity in minority communities. So right away, I contact the Office of Research and said, I'm interested in applying. What the Office of Research did is, let's call the program officer at the foundation and see if your idea and your partnership with the community is what they want to fund and the project. And that was incredibly helpful to move very quickly as soon as I saw the announcement, and for the Office of Research to help me facilitate that meeting. And then the program officer said, it is within our areas of interest, neighborhoods of interest in Chicago. It's a competitive process, but go ahead and submit the proposal. So in the process of submitting proposals, and we were funded, by the way, as my colleague said, seeking a mentor is critical. What specifically you will be asking of the mentor? Can I see a grant? Seek a mentor who has experience in grant writing, but has experience in obtaining funding, right? When you develop the collaboration with a mentor, seek opportunities that they can add you to the team as a collaborator, co-investigator, co-PI, because that helps you when you then go as a PI. So for instance, I have had junior fellows, can I go as a co-PI, as a PI on this big grant? And then when you look at the record, it's really hard, and I've been a reviewer for the federal government. It's really hard when you can't show your trajectory within the area of research that you are pursuing. So it gives you a lot of experience if you have a mentor that is willing to give you opportunities to collaborate, put you as a co-investigator to start. Not everybody starts like that. I did, and that was incredibly helpful. Seeking a mentor also that is willing to give you feedback. I know, according to NICLR, it's only about 2 months that you have to write the grant, but being able to set time aside and devote time to the proposal is really important. I just finished reviewing grants for a federal agency, a panel review, and the one section that typically has the most points is the research methodology and design. In this case, it had almost 30 points, 1/3, close to 1/3 of the proposal. And that's where I realized that most of us were deducing points to different proposals that we review. So pay a lot of attention to matching the priorities of the grant, study grant.gov, the different types of grants, and very close to the priorities. And how is it that my research idea matches the priorities of the grant? Obtaining feedback from peers or a mentor. For instance, at UIC, the Office of Research, if you give them in advance just the methodology or a rough draft of the proposal, they find somebody within the area of expertise to provide you with feedback. There might be other mechanisms at your universities or a senior mentor with experience who might be able to give you feedback. I think that's really, really important opportunity. I started with intramural funding at my local university, at both of the institutions that I have been, gradually moving to co-collaborator, co-investigator, and then receive ASPI, federal funding, a lot of foundation funding as well. One piece of advice that I wish my former mentor had told me is don't give up. So the first NICLR field-initiated grant that I wrote as a PI, I got good reviews, positive score, but it wasn't funded. And I did not resubmit it, and I wish I had. I wish somebody had said, if you get a decent score, if you get positive reviews, but a few weaknesses that they find, mostly in the methodology or whatever, resubmit it. I wish somebody had said that in my early career when I did my first field initiative as a PI. Later on, I was funded with other types of grants, center grants, and DRIPs. And it happened again as a co-PI and PI for the Chicago site on a large 5-year, $3 million grant, again with NICLR for a DRIP, Disability Research and Rehabilitation Program, that we submitted it, and it was not funded. And the score was really good. The comments were positive. The feedback's doable. We resubmitted and then got funded. We got funded for 5 years. We're about to phase the end of the grant this year, and we just resubmitted for another 5 years. So I think it's important, don't give up. If you think you have a good idea that matches the priority, get feedback from a mentor and resubmit it again. Study well the topic. In the grant reviews that we did for this panel review, we noticed that out of the grants we reviewed, that there were a couple that there was a mismatch. So spend your time looking at the priorities, looking at your idea, getting feedback, and match it really well with what is the state of the knowledge. Show that you know the state of the knowledge, but that you can identify the gaps and the need to do the research that you're proposing to do. So we saw a few errors in that. And of course, get feedback on the methodology for large center and RIP grants that I've been part of. Although we might have expertise within our team, in terms of qualitative analysis, we have always added a consultant. And that has helped. The consultant have looked at our data and I said, wait a second, you guys missed it. You know, we get feedback from different consultants. The grants that are applied for, they're looking for strong interdisciplinary teams. Very strong commitment to addressing the disparities. What is the benefit to the community? Knowledge translation, dissemination, partnership with communities and letters of support for the grant that are applied to NICLR have been incredibly important. So for the one that we just submitted 2 weeks ago, for another 5 years of a DRIP, we got 10 letters of support. Not only agencies and disability advocates and national disability institutes saying we need to further study this program and this issue, but also from top mentors and top disability researchers. Make sure to justify your work really well, and something that needs to be done ahead of time. As soon as you know that you're going to apply for a grant, develop a plan for the 2 months that you have to write it. At UIC, you typically need at least a week to get the paper of approvals and all the budget approves and budget justifications throughout university channels. The application starts with approval from the department, it goes to the college, and then moves to the Office of Grants and Contracts. So right away, when I knew we were going to resubmit for another 5 years, I told our business manager who manages the grants, I don't have the grant ready yet, but in a month you couldn't get it. I need your help in getting it moved through the system. And she right away said to me, well, Yolanda, I need 5 days to get it through the system. So you need to plan ahead, right? A successful grant, from my experience of having received, managed over 20 funded grants from foundation to federal funding, not only a good idea, good knowledge of the topic and the state of the literature, but also being able to articulate it and link it to very strong theoretical conceptual model. And that very strong methodological section. That's the section that has, again, the most points, and the section that takes the most part. Methods and design, get a consultant, get feedback, right? Well-grounded project. Study really well the priorities. And another last, I think I still have a minute. Another quick advice, if you're planning to go as a PI for a federal grant, it's really important, and it was critical for me to get those MOLs, $1,200, $5,000 intramural university grants to collect pilot data. Being able to show your federal grant, whether it's NIH, Department of Commerce, NICLR, like I do, is under the Department of Health and Human Services. Having collected pilot data strengthens your case because you already have experience, you already have data that you want to show, but you also have experience with the logistics and the barrier. Okay? And the demands of data collection in the community, especially. But then you also have opportunities to say, we piloted the intervention. And that's what we did with right now, culturally tailored promotora, health promoters intervention, which is the study I direct in a large trip that we have and that we submitted for another 5 years, is that we already had pilot data, right? That this intervention of using community health workers to promote the health of Latinx families of children and young adults with disability works. And the feasibility study, I think it's going to be able to help us make a strong argument. We just cross fingers that is funded. But overall, I would say it takes time, it takes patience, but don't give up. If you don't get funded the first time around, submit it again. And that was one of our experience with the large trip and a large center as well. But right away, if you can, find information at your institution of what kinds of supports are there for faculty, junior faculty who want to start writing grants. And look for intramural funding to help you get started so you have a stronger case and build your scholarship. Because as reviewers, we do look carefully. The person has the background, the knowledge to be able to deliver what they promise. And once you get funded, deliver. Make sure to pay attention to deliverables. We often get officer calls saying, do you guys plan on submitting? Because they love our deliverables. And we deliver what we promise, right? But I think it's important. And then once you have a project officer, develop a good relationship with the project officer. Provide ongoing updates. Every time we produce newsletters for their current grant, and we send the project officer new publications. Look at we just published newsletters, updates, because that helps them realize how much you're producing.
That was terrific. Thank you so much, Dr. Suarez-Balcazar, and all of our speakers so far. We have one more speaker to join us, Dr. Lenny Jason. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela. I've really enjoyed listening to these prior 3 talks, and I'm going to comment on some of the things that they mentioned or alluded to. NIH is particularly interested in what's called translational research. So what that means is I'm a psychologist, so the social sciences, to the extent we work with medical folks, that actually provides some new synergies to understand complex social problems. So sometimes you have a question, and that helps you move to an area that you might not have the expertise on. So I was very interested in chronic fatigue syndrome, which we call ME/CFS. I'm not trained as an epidemiologist, so I reached out to work with an epidemiologist at the University of Illinois, Judith Richmond, and we developed a 20-year collaboration. And together, we could basically do a lot more than either of us could do individually in terms of getting grants. In the social network area, about 10 years ago, one of my graduate students, Ed Stevens, found that if you stayed in a recovery home for 6 months, you'd have a great outcome 2 years later. But the best predictor of staying in the recovery home for 6 months was having a friend in the recovery home. So we said, gee, we got to start understanding social networks, the connections and ties, because it's really important to long-term success. So we looked around in Europe and we found someone that invented something called RCNA, which has to do with understanding relationships that are bidirectional. So someone affects something else and that person affects you. And they put us in touch with John Light at Oregon Research Institute, and we've been working with them for the last decade. Basically, again, I don't have that particular knowledge, but the sociologist who's a mathematician did have that. And together, we were able to understand social networks. For the last 20 years, I've been working with individuals at Lurie's Children's Hospital, Dr. Ben Katz and his group, because they can do medical examinations of patients, and I can basically help think about some of the types of diagnostic issues as a psychologist. And we're currently doing a 6-7 year prospective longitudinal follow-up of 4,500 students who, before the pandemic, we were looking for those that developed mono, which is caused by the Epstein-Barr virus, and we had data before they got mono. So now we can see what's happening to them who recovered from it and who didn't. So you get a trigger like SARS-CoV-2. What happens to those who recover versus those who don't? And you never know. To do that type of research, you want to be working with lots of folks who are maybe in areas that aren't the same as your own. And our most recent grant that we are writing, because we're interested in Epstein-Barr virus, which is causing mono, what's the signature of Epstein-Barr virus? Well, again, that's beyond my scope. So we have people at Arizona State who are helping us, who basically can look at all the different proteins in Epstein-Barr virus. And we have people at Northwestern and Lurie who can take a look at this Epstein-Barr virus and also how does it relate to people who get mono, who recover versus those who don't, but also a very new area, heart transplants in pediatric patients. I don't know if you know, but about 10% are going to end up with cancer. Why do they end up with cancer? Well, sometimes they're getting a heart that's EBV positive, Epstein-Barr virus positive, and then they basically have the Epstein-Barr virus in an immune-compromised state, and they do hundreds of heart transplants a year at Lurie's. So we now have access to that whole data set. So who knows kind of where you go with this stuff, but by working with different types of individuals, you can learn a tremendous amount. Jacob First is basically gave a lecture at DePaul. He's in computer science, and he was basically showing how computers can help us understand whether kind of a growth is cancerous versus not, using radiation and artificial intelligence. So I said, wow, this is cool stuff. So I walked up to him and I said, can you kind of work with us? We've got thousands of data bits, and we want to basically be able to determine whether a person has or doesn't have this illness called MECFS. So we've been working with him for the last decade on artificial intelligence, which is called data mining. So I'm just saying these opportunities are not just at our own setting with Jacob First, who's in a different department, but within the Chicago community at Lurie Hospital, or even kind of outside of our state in Oregon. So you can use these opportunities anywhere today to basically do collaborations. Second thing I wanted to mention is kind of social networks are critically important in this grant game. You know, if you go to a conference and you meet people, you never know. Some of those people are going to be on review committees. And if they like you, and if they know your work, even if you haven't met them, to the extent that they are connected in some ways with the stuff you're doing, that can help you. On the other hand, if you have something that you're doing that basically is completely opposed to what they believe in, that's going to hurt you. So connections and also ideological connections are so important. For a while, I was doing research on a topic involving minors' access to tobacco, and it turns out that was very controversial. There were people who loved it, people that hated it, and it's just interesting that sometimes you just got to sort of think to yourself, can you actually continue to work in an area if it's so controversial? But that really gets me to the next issue, which is kind of controversy. And in a sense, how do you stay with something when it becomes so controversial? So I do work with some very controversial areas, and sometimes the stuff I've done has been a little bit threatening to either individuals or to kind of fields. So as an example, my kind of Oxford House research suggested that people could actually live together in community and be very successful if they could stay in the house for 6 months or more. But that means professionals possibly could be threatened by the fact that these self-help run communities called Oxford houses have no professionals associated to them. So that was a very interesting topic where I spent something like 7 or 8 years trying to get funding from a particular group within the federal government, and proposal after proposal, they basically found all types of reasons not to like it, in part because I think there was a threat to the profession, that if this could be done completely on a self-help basis, what did that mean to them? As opposed to thinking you can collaborate with people who are self-helpers. So sometimes that can hurt you. One of the things that can help you when you have a long-term commitment to something you really care about is that you can develop connections with communities and leaders who can ultimately save the day. So, for example, after 7 or 8 years of putting grants into NIAAA and NIDA on this recovery home and not being successful, the founder of Oxford House, who was Paul Malloy, has recently died, but I was connected with him. I said, we're probably not going to be able to get this research funded because the reviewers constantly say you need to do a randomized study to find out whether Oxford House works or not. And I told them, I said, you can't do a randomized study when each house is independent and they decide whether they're going to let people in or not. Randomization is not going to work. So Paul said to me, look, I've been working with you for years now. I trust you. And not only that, we're going to make it work. If that's what they want, we will do it. So we'll take a person to the house. If they don't get accepted in one house, we'll take them to another house. So we were able to do a randomized clinical trial with the endorsement of the organization, which I thought we couldn't do, to be able to finally get funded. So sometimes your community partners can help you basically get over that critical piece of convincing others that you can be doing research that they feel is needed. And we were able to do that study. The last thing I wanted to kind of mention, besides finding something you care about that you're willing to work on, sometimes for years, because that's the way you're ultimately going to be successful. You don't give up. You can't just submit the grant. You can have the best interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary group. You can basically have the most cutting edge ideas, but the reality is the review process is complicated. And most people submit grants and that's all they do. And they just said, well, it's submitted, that's good enough. That's not good enough. You really need to be thinking about the process of who's reviewing your grants. There's a thing called an SRA, Scientific Review Administrator, within the Center for Scientific Review. That's the review side. So you need to figure out who is on that review committee. There's tons of review groups. Which review group are you sending it to? Because you can specify where your grant's going to go to. Who is the reviewers there? Have you researched the review group to see who's on it? Because there might be people on it who have ideological differences of opinion that you'll never get through. And can you influence basically the membership of the review group? And that's the last thing I'm going to suggest. You can't directly give a name to a person who's organizing the review committee, but your program officer within the federal government, within NIH, for example, can give names if the review group that's existing doesn't have the expertise that you need, so that you can get the names through a program person who can give ideas. And you can also tell your scientific review administrator, these are areas that aren't covered by your reviewers. Can you get those areas covered? That's completely legitimate to do. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you. Wow, what a group of panelists and what incredible advice all four of our panelists are sharing with this group. So a couple of things. First of all, I would like to open this up for question answer for folks that they might have. And I would like to ask that you either put your question in the chat or you raise your hand, and we will try to go through this in a sort of an orderly fashion. So I open up the floor to questions that folks might have for our incredible panel. So we have our first question. For those of you who have gone for foundation funding, how have you learned about which foundations might be a good fit? Yolanda, please.
What I did, because I have received funding from the Chicago Community Trust, the Kellogg Foundation, and CLOC, Consortium to Lower Obesity in Chicago Children, a few years ago, small projects. Although the CCT was kind of a larger project, I asked the Office of Research at your university. I know UIC has several colleges have that, but also studied some of the foundations that are funding, supporting health research, social justice, whatever your interest is. Look for foundation lists and ask someone at that office of research to help you. These are my areas of interest. What foundations might be out there that could provide opportunities for funding? Study the foundation really well. Look at all the different opportunities to apply for projects, and don't hesitate to call and say, I want to learn more about this and that. And that's what we did with one of the staff members, personnel at the Office of Research, my community partner, and myself when we got 4 years of funding from the Chicago Community Trust. But I think study what the foundation does. And what's the other thing is that most foundations and federal funding do it for sure. Most foundations do. They actually list, these are the projects that we have funded in the past, the titles and the universities. And I believe the investigators as well. So you can look at what have they funded in the past. But don't hesitate to reach out to a program officer, because I have found that to be useful.
Dr. Dugas?
And,
I was going to say it
Pam-
was the same thing with regards to see what the foundation has previously funded, because you need to make sure that your research interests align very closely to what they're passionate about. Being a foundation, they will have very key areas that they want to fund, and it's also very useful once you've figured out, what they're funding. If you can get hold of your research office and see if they can find someone who is funded that is willing to share their application with you, to understand what it was about that application that had the hook and made it something that the foundation wanted to go after. Thank you.
And just to kind of bring in the introduction of something that I think is important, and that has to do with something that maybe scientists don't necessarily subscribe to, but we have to get lucky. Be in the right place, the right time, with the right ideas. And I say that is probably a larger role than probably most people are willing to admit. Sometimes, through connections, you just happen to be at a place where there's money available. So as an example, a graduate student many years ago was working for one of our kind of state agencies on substance use, and kind of mentioned that they actually have some money, and they have to get rid of it for the end of the fiscal year. And they said, could you write something up? So in about half hour, I wrote up 2 paragraphs, sent it in, and got a couple of $100,000. Now, it wasn't a brilliant idea, but it was the right place, the right time. And those things can happen. So just Lady Luck, just remember, it's out there.
One more thing, Pamela, is that okay? One thing that helped me, especially because of my areas of interest in social disparities, health equity, health promotion, with the foundation that I've received funding, is to have a very strong community partner. That there's a history that we work together, have projects together, and that was critical, but based on my area. So I don't know if that applies to all the different areas, because most of the foundations are really looking for impact in the community and knowledge translation.
Thank you. Dr. Dugas, yes.
Yeah, the luck is a massive part of it, of course. And the other thing, if I think about the foundation grant that I have, is it was right post-COVID, and so what is happening in the world, is also if you can leverage something that you can, like a massive world event, or we have a climate change grant right now as well. The things that are happening on the world stage that is very topical in the media, and you can add sprinklings in with your application. I think that is also very useful.
Thank you. I'm reminded, as you all are talking, about a grant I had written to Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to illustrate your point, and it was rejected, but they invited me to come in and learn about grant writing. And when I was there, I heard a lot of people talking about immigrant health. And so I revised my grant to have an immigrant, non-immigrant comparison, got funded. Because it was really starting to get tailored towards what was important to them too. So illustrating, I think, many of the great points of our panelists here. Another question, a quick comment. Dr. McMahon commented, and I would also invite you to turn on your cameras for the discussion portion of this. Another question from Dr. Darnell here at Parkinson School. I'm interested in hearing more about getting support from consultants to support proposals. What kinds of consultants have you used? How much should be budgeted for this additional layer of review? How much time should be reserved for this step? And when is the optimal time to get this support?
With the current draft that I am a co-PI, it started about 4 years ago. We're in the last year of the grant. We added a biostatistical consultant. So you may need to think differently about consultants. Some are outside of your institution collaborators, like community partners. In my case, disability advocates. They often appear in the budget justification as consultants, but these are outside of the institution collaborators, right? For grants that you're collecting a lot of quantitative data, and part of this grant, we kind of follow the Health Disparities model of CDC, which has 3 main components: identify disparities, understand them, and intervene. And our 5-year draft was about all 3 components. So the first 2 components, we were collecting a lot of data. So I think it made it stronger to have a biostatistician. In that case, how much did we budget? Only for the 2 years that we were collecting the data. In our case, it was only like 5-10% of the time, because we had team members who knew how to do it. We just wanted somebody oversight who would be looking at these analyses differently, and that was very helpful. But I think it depends on your needs. In our case, we only budgeted, I think, either between 5 and 10% of the time for 2 years of the 5-year grant.
So, certainly most people put consultants on their grants so that they can protect themselves from the reviewers who are basically saying, you don't have the competence in your group. So bring someone on who can take this angle that you don't have. Now, whether that's true or not, in terms of a lack of competence, it doesn't matter. You just have to do that to sort of assure the reviewers. But I think the real benefit of kind of consultants is actually before you submit the grant. And what you really want is you want to have a review panel of people review your grant before you actually submit it. So you want to have people tear it apart so that you can get all the benefits and the wisdom and basically find the errors. And truthfully, if you're in some high-powered settings, which some of the people here are, it's just a natural process that you do. You have it basically reviewed by consultants, by people who can basically give you that type of advice. If you're in the situation where you're constrained by not being able to get those resources, or by, in a sense, having to deal with administrative issues to even get the grant out, you're at a tremendous disadvantage from all those settings you're competing with that are providing incredible resources for you to get the money. And, hopefully you don't want to be in that situation.
I think at Loyola, my understanding it's a department by department with having a consultant read your grant before it actually goes out for review. So, it's differently, it's not a one policy at the moment, is my understanding.
I would also add, I think it's important or helpful as you're developing a proposal to not do it in isolation. I have personally found when I talk with people about my ideas over time, the idea gets clearer or more succinct and easier to describe what I want to do, so that it becomes easier to write and easier for reviewers to understand and then get funded. So making sure you have a core group of folks that you are talking about what your proposal is so that you're revising it sort of in real time is a useful step also. I would like to point out that we've added a link in the chat for a survey just to collect a little tiny bit of information from you all. So if you have a moment, please click on that link. And I have another question in the chat. What strategies do you recommend for effectively demonstrating the significance and impact of a proposed study in a grant application, particularly for projects that are highly innovative?
Just a couple quick comments on that, and that is the innovation quotient has to be reined in, because if your thinking is so far beyond where the field is, they won't accept it. I hate to say that, but the reality is incremental change is what's going to get the best score. So if you have too much pilot work, they'll say, we've already funded this stuff and you're not making enough of a change. If you don't have enough pilot stuff, they'll basically also criticize you. So you have to find a balance of saying, yes, I've done this. This needs to be done. It's incredibly important, but it's not so out of the atmosphere that it's going to question people of you basically taking too much of a leap. You want to really make those leaps because that's what interests you. But if you do that, you're going to get penalized for it, unfortunately.
I have seen strategy in grant proposals when I've reviewed them where the person who wrote the proposal in the significant section, they highlighted, made bold certain words that were in alignment with what the notice of funding opportunity had on there, so that they were trying to make it as easy as possible for the reviewer to see those key elements in there without having to sort of read that whole thing and have them highlighted, in the proposal. So I've seen that as a strategy. I don't know what panelists think about that, but I have found it as a reviewer to be a nice way to help me see what they're doing in smaller bits.
And just to add to what you're saying, Pamela, if you are writing a one-page rebuttal, which means you're revising a proposal, when you're writing that up, you can basically say, and as is shown on page 22, this is how I'm addressing this, so that you can point to exactly the pieces that are basically being revised in the proposal. Anything you can do to alert the reviewers to basically what you're doing makes a tremendous help. And I just came out of a review cycle, and I can tell you the hundreds of pages I was reading, and the fact that proofing was so poor on some of the grants, misspellings, logic mistakes, incorrect numbers that they used. So by all means, tidy it up. Have some other people look at it, catch the spelling mistakes. You can't just, I mean, because, you know, you're putting together a grant proposal and you're trying to convince these reviewers and trying to convince me that you're competent. But if you can't write stuff clearly without lots of punctuation, spelling mistakes, and logic problems and inconsistent numbers, then you kind of say, well, how are they going to do their research if they can't write a proposal that's good, even though they're very eminent people? So by all means, kind of do due diligence when you're putting a proposal together and have the time. And that's why you don't want to get this thing in the last minute, because you don't have the time to make all the corrections. You should have your proposal written weeks before so that you can really then spend the time making it better, not having the first draft. If your first draft is what's going in, that's a tremendous disadvantage.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Lenny, I just finished a review process for NICLR, and I noticed that the proposals that we reviewed, that we reduced points as a panel, had innovative ideas. There were a couple that had innovative ideas, but they weren't really matched that well with the priorities of the grant. So you wonder if did they really study carefully the priorities of the grant, because they're kind of forcing the link, and that didn't help. And it was an innovative idea, but we thought maybe this is not the right mechanism that the person needs. And I think you really want to pay attention to just, you know, it's an innovative idea, but it'll play that balance that Dr. Jason was talking about, and really doing a good job in matching to the priorities of the grant, and paying attention to the section about how XYZ population is going to benefit, and being able to explain that really clearly. I think it was critical. But as junior faculty looking for early career, getting feedback from others like my colleagues have said, I think is critical. And more so for people who have been on the other side reviewing, not only submitting and being part of successful grants, but reviewing grant applications, if they can provide you with feedback.
I see Megan Greason put a great comment in the chat that said, I was trained to put labels from solicitation priorities in parentheses. For example, my aim is XXXX, and then in parentheses, priority 1, culture and disparities, et cetera. Great tip. I do think we have a wide variety of folks here in our audience, and I'm sure there's many of you that have great tips and ideas also, and I encourage you to add them to the chat for others to see any additional thoughts that you might have. Dr. McMahon, are there any additional questions or ideas you think we should consider here?
We had generated a list of questions, and I've been looking at them, trying to think, because I think a lot of the panelists, actually, it was such a wonderful session. I really enjoyed and thank the panelists. I think that they addressed a lot of things. One thing maybe that they hadn't addressed is tips or feedback once the grant is submitted. That might be one. I could post the questions that we generated in the chat to see if any others, if that resonates with any of our audience participants, and or if any of the panelists would like to elaborate on any of these questions. I just put them in the chat.
Thank you. How do you handle rejection? Our colleague, Amy Luke, who Lara was referring to, the star here, and I were talking about that the other day, and it sort of matters where you're at in your trajectory. And when you're younger, you think, I thought, how did I ever even get a PhD? I clearly don't know anything, and I'm just terrible. And then you get more secure in what you're doing and where you're at, and you think, well, they clearly don't have experience in this field and don't know what we're talking about. You sort of go across the whole spectrum there. Megan, do you have advice for folks that have a track record with a specific federal agency, but are interested in transitioning to other agencies as well?
If it helps, I've gotten DOJ funding, and that's where I have a record, but I'm interested in trying to open more possibilities.
Yeah, when you're transitioning, between different paths or funding agencies, I would find a collaborator that is already, maybe more established at that agency, or is doing the work that you kind of want to transition to. Don't try and go it alone is what I would say. Always try and write some publications, abstracts together, show that you're collaborating, and this is a field that you're trying to take your research into and build it in a new way. But I would say definitely do not go it alone, because the reviewers are very savvy about picking up they truly look at your bio sketches to see what your publication history is and who you're publishing with. And so try and create those connections between different groups without something completely new, because that'll be picked up very quickly.
So I've tried to see what it's like to work outside the US. And there's two kind of large collaborations in Europe that can offer up to $10 million. And two groups approached me with interest in working with them. And ideologically, one group kind of had a very psychogenic explanation of ME/CFS, and the other group had a more biological explanation. So you can understand which group I aligned with. But it was a very different experience, and they're looking for very different things, and their evaluations are very different. So there's a tremendous new learning that does have to occur, but hopefully some of the same kind of skills that you have that you've honed in the US or any other agency will work. And actually this last week, I began working with the British NIH kind of federal system on a project that, when you have an area that's very well defined, you will get approached from people. And in this area, it has to do with pacing in dealing with long COVID and ME/CFS as a treatment approach. So I'm now working with that group on a proposal. And again, it's a very different proposal. The British NIH is not the same as this NIH, but a lot of the same principles are going to work. But there's so many unique things to that system. It's like a different culture. So there's a big learning curve that has to occur.
We have another question in the chat from Dr. Casebolt here at Parkinson. Any thoughts for how to avoid going alone when you are in a particularly niche area, but maybe very important and understudied area? Maybe strategies for getting other researchers interested in your area of work?
My advice would be to avoid, especially if it's the first grant, going alone. So what do? Go outside of your institution. This has to be somebody in the country who is interested in the same research, search on who is looking at that specific topic and area of interest, who has a record, and reach out to people. I think that happened a couple of times to me where couple of people across, it was actually in the same campus, but across campus that I didn't know, reach out about, we put in this proposal, but you have experience in this and that. Could you give us feedback? And would you like to be a co-PI? And we got funded. So I think it's important if you're in a junior stage, just reach out to who's doing what and gain the mentorship so you can start collaborating. And it's okay to seek out mentors out there. There are a lot of people who are very much willing to do it.
I would just say, find the area that you really want to work in and just stick with it, and you'll make contributions. And as you make contributions in a particular area, you never know who's going to approach you. They kind of want to work with you on grants. Before the pandemic, we developed a scale to measure post-exertional malaise because that's one of the primary characteristics of ME/CFS. Who would have known that this was the only scale that's out there that measures this when the pandemic hit? And then we had literally hundreds of researchers who were interested in this particular scale. No idea that we published it in an obscure journal. We thought nobody really cared, but then it just took off. So find something, keep working at it, and you'll never know when people are going to start approaching you because they find what you're doing is helpful to their work.
So I hear a couple of strategies in these comments. One is you could cold call folks. You can identify folks that are in the area, send them an email and start talking to them. Another is you can present your work at conferences and talk to people who are walking around. And certainly as you start exploring what you're doing and publishing papers, you might start getting greater reach for people who might be interested in your work. So it sounds like there's a lot of different ways that you can approach, how do you reach out to folks and figure out who can you work together with. Well, this has been more than I could have ever had hoped for. And many of the folks here have been folks who have either, Dr. Jason goes way back for me in the 80s when I was an undergraduate student. And I even feel like I get to be a professor today because he helped guide me way back then to folks that are just incredible researchers and successful and kind and thoughtful and experienced rejection. It's all part of the process. So thank you. A big round of applause to our panelists for sharing all of your ideas and thoughts and tips. This has been outstanding. We do have a link that we put in the chat. If you can take a minute, if you haven't yet, to click on it and fill out our little survey. I'll wait around for a few minutes to make sure folks have time to fill that out. And thank you again for everybody's time. Hopefully, we'll have an opportunity to think about doing other types of collaborative things between our universities. As I often say, it really is team science, and we are not limited by our institutions, and we're all in this together. So I'm really thrilled that we were able to go beyond our own internal silos and get this together. More to come is my hope. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.